Welcome to the Global News Podcast from the BBC. I'm Celia Hatton, and today I'm joined by our global health correspondent, Sofia Bettiza. Sofia, you've been looking at the political debate around surrogacy in Ukraine. Many people might not realize that Ukraine has such a big surrogacy industry, even after 4 years of war.
Yeah, Ukraine is the sort of second biggest destination for surrogacy after the US. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, obviously those numbers went down. The number of foreigners, of people traveling to Ukraine to have babies through surrogacy dropped. But what we found is that sort of nearly 5 years on, those numbers are going back up, and they've nearly gone back to pre-war levels.
I know that a lot of countries globally are grappling with regulatory issues around surrogacy. But to focus on Ukraine, tell us about a bill that could restrict surrogacy in Ukraine and what it might mean.
So at the moment, surrogacy is legal in Ukraine, and that's partly why so many people choose it as a destination. As you said, you've got other countries around the world that are banning surrogacy, that are restricting it. In Italy, it's a universal ban. So Ukraine, it's entirely legal in Ukraine. But the thing is that could be about to change because of this bill. This bill wants to restrict surrogacy, effectively banning it for foreigners. So unless one of the two is Ukrainian, they won't be able to go ahead and do surrogacy in Ukraine.
And so why? What's the logic behind that?
There's a few reasons. The first one is that at the moment, this is a huge business in Ukraine, but it's not regulated. There is no regulation, and there are things that could go wrong in surrogacy deals. So first of all, they want to regulate it. There's also an element of Ukraine having to sort of deal with a demographic crisis. And so quite a few politicians we spoke to said to us, well, if Ukrainian women are having babies, they should have babies for Ukrainians. They shouldn't export babies abroad. But I think sort of the idea is that to bring in regulation to protect the children and also to protect vulnerable women.
This is such a complex issue, and you've been speaking to people on all sides of this issue inside Ukraine and outside Ukraine. Let's go through them a little bit, and you can tell us more about your experience of reporting on this story and the people that you met, starting with Karina, one of the surrogates that you interviewed.
Yeah, so Karina, when she was 17, her family home in Bakhmut was bombed and destroyed. She said everything is gone, photos, it's just rubble and ashes. Obviously, Bakhmut is near the front line, and it was at the very beginning of the war, heavily contested between Russia and Ukraine. So she had to leave her home at only 17 and really struggled to make money. And she got pregnant, has her own 1-year-old daughter. And there was this moment where she was sort of buying bread, and she was counting pennies to buy bread, and she just couldn't afford bread. She couldn't afford formula for her child or nappies. And so that's when she decided she had to take drastic measures. And she was actually initially against surrogacy. She thought it was something really, not for her, but that sort of her situation and the war changed her mind.
The war changed her mind in terms of wanting to do it, but has she also changed her mind in terms of how she wants to maybe help couples who are struggling with infertility?
So yes and no. She said to us that when she first decided to do surrogacy, she was very angry at this situation, but she's now accepted it and she seems content. But, she is ultimately doing it for the money. Interestingly, she was supposed to get more money, but because she was pregnant with twins, and that's an extra sort of payment on top. But unfortunately, one of them died, and so her pay was cut, and that's in her contract.
How lucrative is this for the women who take part?
So it depends, but normally they would make about $17,000, which in Ukraine is about double the yearly salary. So it's quite a lot of money. They mostly get it at the end. So it's very much linked on how the pregnancy goes. But we spoke to a surrogate who's 37, and we asked her, is this money going to change your life? And she said, well, she'd done surrogacy twice. This was her second time she's currently pregnant. And she said, this is good money, but I have 2 children. I have debt. I don't have a house. This is not that much money. It's okay. And that was quite surprising to me. In terms of how much it costs to do surrogacy in Ukraine, It's around 60,000 US dollars to begin with. But if you look at other countries like the US, where it is also legal, it's at least double the price.
And what about the women who carry these babies? If something goes wrong health-wise with the baby or for them, what happens? Does the clinic take care of them?
So the clinics say that they do, and they look after their surrogates really well. They have checkups nearly every week. We were inside one of Ukraine's biggest surrogacy clinics, and there are about 30 women queuing to get their scans. So they do say that they are very, very careful. But of course, there's an element here of, they want the pregnancy to go well because it's a transaction. And they're actually, if they think there might be a problem with the fetus, with the baby, they normally do abortions because ultimately they want the pregnancy, this very expensive medical procedure, to go well for the people who are paying for it.
I mean, that's what it keeps coming back to, right? That this is a business.
Yeah. And I think two things can be true at once, right? We spoke to intended parents who said that this made their dreams come true. They were able to have, a child after nearly 10 years of trying, but ultimately it is a business. And what I thought was really interesting in Ukraine is that we were told that about 80% of intended parents are delayed in coming to Ukraine to collect their babies. It's often weeks, it's sometimes months. One woman we spoke to cared for someone else's surrogate babies for nearly a year. And so what critics say is that this reflects the fact that ultimately surrogacy in Ukraine is a transaction.
I thought it was interesting in your reporting how you had interviewed the surrogate mother who has been affected by the war in Ukraine, but you also interviewed a couple who use surrogacy services in Ukraine who were also affected by the conflict. Can you tell me about that couple and what they told you?
Yeah, so Elena and Igor tried to have children for 9 years and were unsuccessful. And they decided to go for surrogacy in Ukraine because they ran out of options and they could afford it. And the whole process was, really stressful because you're effectively traveling to a country at war. You are, for 9 months, your surrogate mother is pregnant in a country at war. And then you get to that country, and for those sort of They stayed in Ukraine for about a couple of weeks waiting for the right documents, and they were in and out bomb shelters every day with a newborn. It's a lot all of a sudden. We spoke to couples from the UK who actually had to stay in Ukraine for 3 months, and just having that reality for 3 months, being in and out of bomb shelters, is really, as they said, intense. But they all say it's worth it because of the final result. They become a family, they get a baby.
In your story, you also explored some of the real downsides of surrogacy, or some of the real costs. You talked about a little boy who'd been abandoned by his biological parents. Can you tell me more about him?
Yeah, I think that was possibly the most sort of shocking thing that we saw when we were in Ukraine. This boy was born premature. He had a severe brain injury, and he'll require care for the rest of his life. So when the surrogacy agency that handled the surrogacy informed his intended parents, they just disappeared. They decided they did not want him, and they were impossible to reach. So they turned to the surrogate mother. She wasn't interested either. Legally, she doesn't have any responsibility. The responsibility is with the intended parents. And so this child, who's now 5 years old, lives in a children's home. His file was viewed by about 15 families, but nobody was interested. And it's very, very unlikely that he'll get adopted. And that is a really good example of why politicians want to bring in this law, because at the moment, legally, the intended parents are responsible. But how do you enforce that if they just disappear, if they live in another continent?
And you also spoke with a women's rights activist who also gave some reasons as to why she was against surrogacy.
Yeah, first of all, she strongly believes that surrogacy agencies target vulnerable women. She says that since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that the number of women who are, in her words, desperate, looking for a way to make ends meet is growing. And so they are more susceptible for something like this. And she thinks that even if now they think they're making an informed choice, in a few years, they might feel differently. That trauma might hit them later. And she also points to the fact that about 10 years ago, surrogacy in Ukraine was very lucrative for women. They could buy a house with that money, whereas now it doesn't pay that well. So she thinks it's extremely unethical. She actually thinks the law doesn't go far enough and surrogacy should be banned altogether.
Sofia, if this bill is passed, what does it mean for the women who make money right now as surrogates? What did they tell you?
Well, everyone I spoke to was really concerned about this bill, and they were very much against it because, in a way, for a lot of women, this has become a lifeline in a country that is at war, where they might have lost their homes, their livelihoods, the possibility to have stable jobs. And so they very much think that this is a way to help couples have a child and make money for themselves. So the women I spoke to are very much against it.
You also profiled an agency that deals with a lot of surrogate pregnancies. What did they tell you? How will they react, or how will the whole industry react if the bill is passed?
Well, interestingly, they were not very worried about this because they say that the demand for surrogacy is huge and it's growing. And so they feel that as long as there is demand, they'll find a way to operate and to survive. And so they feel that if surrogacy in Ukraine, I think we should clarify, surrogacy wouldn't be banned completely, it would just be banned for foreigners. Foreigners are about 95% of the people who do it. They would just relocate to a different country, possibly Georgia, they talked about Azerbaijan. So in a way, they'll survive.
It was great to speak with you, Sofia. Thank you. Our global health correspondent, Sofia Bettiza. And if you want to hear more from the Global News podcast, click the link below. Thanks for joining us.